and I am going to record on YouTube.
Okay.
And both are live.
Okay, cool. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. This is Howard County Fiscal Year 22 Spending Affordability Advisory Committee. Today is January the 28th. We have 4 items on the agenda. We'll start with the school presentation of the superintendent's proposed FY22 budget. The second item will our library system will present their requested budget for fiscal 22. Then we have 2 economists, Dr. Irani and Dr. Clinch, to present their economic outlook for both globally, regional, and also for the county. So I'll start with Dr. Monorano and Mr. Siddiqui, can you run the file from your screen?
Yes, I can. Let me try sharing, and then I'll toss it over to Dr. M.
Just let me know when you're ready.
And for others there, if you're not a speaker, could you please mute yourself? Just make sure to minimize the noise in the background. Okay.
Trouble sharing. Give me one more minute to try.
We can see it actually.
Could you see it? Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing it.
It's not anymore. Just now, it's actually your screen was on the.
Can you see it?
There we go.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sun. Good
Thank
morning,
you.
Dr. Sun and members of the Spending and Affordability Committee on this early morning. I want to start the opportunity by going through a brief overview of the school system's budget. In the middle of the pandemic, the business of the school system continues, and I want to provide that opportunity. I realize I have about 30 minutes, and I'm going to try to move through this rapidly to give it the justice that it needs, recognizing it's a $932 million budget, but I want to provide the opportunity for questions from my staff, and I'm joined with Jahantaf Siddiqui and Darren Conforti, who oversee my budget process. So once again, good morning. As you know, the Howard County Public School System is one of the most rapid growing school systems in the state of Maryland, even during the pandemic. Although we have lost students in enrollment during the pandemic, we are still on projections to continue the rapid growth, expecting about 773 new students next year for our projected enrollment of 58,522. You can see that on the slide. Summarizing that, I'm not going to go through every data point. I want you to be really focused on the shifting demographics. Our free and reduced meals rate continues to grow even during the pandemic. We are now at 23%. We have approximately 600 homeless students, and 10% of our overall student body receives special education services. Also, take a look at the diversity of our school system. We are one of the most diverse school systems in the state of Maryland. We celebrate the beauty of our student body every day. As you know, we are one of the largest, if not the largest employer in Howard County, with 8,570 full and part-time employees, with nearly 5,000 teachers, 4,800 to be precise. As you can imagine, like all of you, COVID-19 has dominated all aspects of our school system since last March. And in the pandemic response, we've adapted to the instructional processes, ramped up capacity in instructional technology, online instruction protocols and resources, professional readiness, managed within existing levels of funding without any need to reduce staff or service levels. And let me say that again, we have not reduced any levels of staffing or compensation during the pandemic. Deepened our wells of resilience and resourcefulness, and our system's greatest strength, our people. During this time, we have focused heavily on equity, striving to alleviate the disproportionate impact of students already struggled with poverty and disabilities, language barriers, family strife, and other challenges. Those are alive and well in our community and need to be tended to every day. And through our budget process, you will see that. And we have many of our individuals who have been struggling throughout that, and it has been a dominating factor of our planning. I do want to let you know many things I am so proud of during the fact of the pandemic, that we have served over close to 3.5 million meals during the pandemic. We have grab and go meals at no cost. We've adapted to the use of technology to support the virtual instructional model. We're now completely primed for a 1-to-1 student ratio, and then continuing to lead into the coming back to school on a normalized level, leading into the summer with reimagining our summer learning and recovery and acceleration plan, and then hopefully building and taking all the success, all the things that we've learned through the pandemic in our school system and carrying those forward into the fall as we all hope for the day of normalized education, which I believe is this fall. If I could also let you know as we move to the next slide, in terms of the budget planning aspect, issues that we have to take into consideration, there's a maintenance of effort, which is directly tied to the prior year enrollment levels. And we have, as I've mentioned, experienced a temporary drop in the FY21 enrollment. And that may, as we've been on our planning, limit state and local funding. And we can talk about that in more detail. But I'm firmly of the belief that the number of parents that I've talked to, once we're able to get back to a normalized level of schooling, that is an elastic number. That 1,600 will spring back, and it's very elastic. And I believe that individuals will return. I'm making my appeals to all of our parents to come back to us, to the public school system as we continue to grow. We continue to look at very carefully the support of all the CARES Act money and how we have been able to address the use of those dollars as one-time funding to help then ramp up technology and online instruction. And these grants, unlikely to be available on a continuing basis, but cost-sustained capacity must be paid. And county and state, as we know, faces steep financial challenges that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And one of the challenges that I have in our work session, again with the board this evening, will be the understanding of all these various categories of money, one-time CARES money, money coming from the state, dollars allocated in the governor's budget, and then how we've managed through that, and then utilizing those dollars on a one-time level, such as my focus on technology, the 1-to-1 ratios for devices, not only for now, but to sustain that in the future that has recurring cost. As mentioned, also the budget management and grant funds to support those programs to manage the $30 million and other unbudgeted pandemic costs and one-time investment related to the pandemic, not necessarily built in to the FY22 recommendations. The second CARES Act recently passed makes over $19 million of grant funds available for the recovery of learning, which is a qualifying use of those funds. And we'll get into that if you have questions about that, how many years we actually have to spend that. That doesn't have necessarily a tight timeline on it. We have upwards of 2 to 3 years to spend those dollars. If we could move to the next slide, which is the total budget that I have submitted, which I believe is a very judicious, very responsible budget. You see that big number in the middle, $932.4 million, which represents a 1.5 level in growth. It supports the anticipated enrollment growth, fully meets salary commitments as we are in the process of negotiating with all of our bargaining units, fully funds employee benefits, and I'll gladly talk about that as it relates to our healthcare deficits, something that I am most rabid about during my tenure as superintendent, to vanquish that altogether and build a fund balance up necessary for us to address the ongoing challenges and costs of healthcare. But we have to fully fund that every year to prevent any other concerns in that arena. And many of you understand as employees and employers in your organizations, and we are self-supported in terms of our insurance. So understand the challenges associated with that, and that's a large chunk of the 932. This also maintains current service level, support level, staff positions, and benefits and class sizes. I've recommended no cuts of employees, no adjustments to class sizes, and it also sustains the technology infrastructure developed over the prior 10 months. So what we are doing now has to be sustained with increased focus on my technology department and then the support necessary to advance the 21st century education with the use of those technologies. Another major point, and I want you to write this one down, this budget does not include any fund balance usage. I am not a proponent of using one-time dollars to cover recurring costs in a budget. And as you know, those fund balances do represent one-time monies, and the budgeting of one-time funds for use in covering recurring costs is inconsistent with sound budgeting principles and has created structural issues within the budget. I've rung that bell year after year after year, and in some cases we haven't had a choice but to address that at the end of the budget cycle. I'm presenting this budget to the board this year with no use of fund balance. Continue to the next slide if we could. The budget proposal does, in summary, and there's an incredible amount of detail for this. That's why this is a 6-month-long process. The budget proposal provides $4.1 million, projected addition of 380 general ed K through 12 new student for new students next year for the budget enrollment, an additional 380 positions, 5.4 million to project for my ongoing focus on special education enrollment of 163 students and maintain existing service levels of special education. I'm very proud of the work in the arena of special education and the support from the Board of Education, as we have been woefully under-supported in many years, trying to get back to where we need to be, and consistently have supported that on a staggered approach throughout the budget, and you'll see 5.4 devoted to that area. As I've said, maintaining class size, taking into account the implications for the pandemic associated with that, the maintenance of effort calculated during the K through 12 enrollment, and the possible 24.7 million decrease in state funding. And again, when I bring that up, that's about the resources and what is in the governor's budget. And we have been advocating to be held harmless in the governor's budget so that we do not see a dip for funding associated with the enrollment dip. And that's all across the state with my colleagues in the 24 LEAs, that if that were to occur, which we believe that it will not, is that it could have devastating effects in terms of our overall budget. Again, I've got $6.6 million devoted to staff compensation, and again, to reiterate the 5.4 for special ed. Next slide, please. Again, you see the chart here, the bar graph that indicates the special education funding during my tenure, and the devotion to the focus of how we've increased our focus regarding that. You will see that special education funding has increased over 38 million over the last 5 years, approximately from 99 million to 137.1 for the proposed fiscal year 2022. And for special education, the annual increase is about 6.5 to 6.7%. And then in the operating budget, the remainder of the budget is 2.3%. So look at the focus of the disaggregated focus regarding my most vulnerable children within the school system. Next slide, please. Again, members of this body, this morning, I want you to look at some additional items that we're placing focus on as critical investments. I'm very, very much focused on reading, as everyone knows, a primary focus of any school system. And then as we tend to the Ready to Learn Acts associated with the legislation, the focus on a universal screener and early intervention, more focus regarding dyslexia. I'm allocating 4.5 reading specialists, and then ongoing training, which is specialized training to address early learning disabilities, and additional focus for our students who are struggling readers, what is called Orton-Gillingham, well received and advocated by our community, and I've fortified our budget in a way to support that. Many of you know me well and know that my continued focus is on mental health and well-being. One of the shocking pieces and focus of the pandemic, with all of us being isolated in our homes, many of my students, obviously, who've been isolated in their homes, many students have focused due to the lack of social interaction and the needs associated in the mental health area. We're seeing that being exacerbated by the pandemic, so I continue to roll out a focus on additional positions for mental health, with 7 new positions regarding social workers, nurses, counselors, and psychologists. Continue to fortify all of our schools in that arena, and working with our local partners, such as the Horizon Foundation and others, to help us sustain those efforts as we reach out to our community and our students and meet the needs of social emotional well-being. The next area of focus, as I've emphasized over and over, and I think you've got it by now, is the need for technology and the focus we have on 5 new positions to sustain the work regarding our Chromebooks, because there's an infusion of an incredible number of Chromebooks. I am so proud of that initiative and what that means for our students. Sustaining that 1-to-1 ratio is going to cost us about $1 million. And then, as many of you know, the concerns that several of the surrounding school systems have had, several of our jurisdictions around cybersecurity. We have an incredibly talented technology department, and we're putting 1.2 in there to devote to cybersecurity initiatives to reduce our vulnerability for cyber attacks, something of great concern, and I hope you all share that same concern with me. Then the other issues such as bandwidth expansion and instructional software round out that arena to a total of about $1 million for those 2 combined. Next slide, please. Again, anybody who will listen to me, and it's early in the morning, definitely knows that I have been ringing the bell loud about the fully funding the healthcare obligations, and continue to focus regarding the deficit reduction in FY20 was about 20.5 from 39.2 during FY20. Proud to say that we have now got that down to 18.7, but I am just as ramped up on that today as I was yesterday and last year and the years before. I will not rest until that is completely eliminated and we have established a fund balance to address the critical shifts and swings in the healthcare arena. It is 18.7. I'm going to look for cooperation from the county as well as the Board of Education to actively look at our savings in our county's fund balance, our areas of saving with internally, and I think we need to continue to make that strong commitment to eliminate that. That has become a major albatross around my neck to continue to lead this system in ways that we want to project in a futuristic way, but that continues to be there. So the focus is on that in this budget. And then for FY22, the fund actuarially projected health costs for the 4th consecutive year, the continued reductions, and the 3.7 projected increase in healthcare costs are all baked in to this budget again. Next, please. So the ongoing commitment to equity, as many of you know, that this is a strong focus of our shift in our overall delivery model of education in Howard County, our continued focus on our strategic call to action, which is completely aligned to our budget. I'm so proud of the work of having a fully articulated strategic call to action. Our strategic call to action is aligned completely to our budget with references throughout that it helps us address the equity components of our budget through the dedication of funding to support our most vulnerable children. And those focus areas are in terms of our expanded work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, continuing to expand that out with additional positions added last year with our restorative practices, our student and family liaisons, continued focus on our workforce diversity, focused on already issues that I've talked about with our mental health issues around student services, and ongoing building out a more robust community collaboration. And the adoption of our equity policy this year, which was absolutely a historical policy. If you have time, I encourage you all to go online and read that, which is our commitment to our children, that every child in the Howard County Public School System, not just some, but all, will receive a quality education, and that is memorialized in our equity policy. Next, please.
That's the last slide,
That's
Dr.
the last one.
Marano.
So I'm on such a roll here early in the morning, and it's not even 7:30. So good morning, everybody. Again, what an honor it is to be with you bright and early in the morning. And I have a long day like I know all of you do, and miles to go before we sleep. So whatever the process is for questions, Dr. Sun, I'm ramped up and ready to go. I hope everybody else is. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maturana. Really appreciate that. So, committee members, if any of you have questions, please unmute yourself and you can talk. Thank you.
And I see a lot of quiet. If I've dazzled you so much with my presentation today, as a good teacher, I always carry my classroom wherever I go. If you don't have any questions, then I guess we've done a pretty decent job of a comprehensive overview.
I think you did an excellent job.
Dr. Martorano, this is Joan Dreesen. I do have one question. Could you give a little bit of specifics in the equity area about the increases in the budget and how that is reflected in the various budget lines?
Yeah, so again, the overall budget is a very responsible budget taking into account. I've got a staggered increase regarding our supports for social workers, for our responses in that arena, our additional focus on struggling readers, as I've emphasized regarding Orton Gillingham, and our universal screeners, incredible work. That is a major piece of equity to have early identifying work around our struggling readers. That is a gateway to success for our children, particularly if you adopt the philosophy that in the early grades that we're adopting the philosophy of learning to read, and then from 3rd grade on, reading to learn. So building a scaffold support system from pre-K through 12 to identify readers, because we recognize if children aren't reading at the levels at which they need to be, they have a very strong tendency to fall further behind. Further illuminated in that area, what I want to amplify is the ongoing focus of equity as it is devoted to special education. We have continued to sustain those efforts and provide increases year after year, but I want the committee to know that although we've made increased efforts, I'm not to the levels of where I believe that we should be. We still have gaps in that, but we are addressing those. So that is a major chunk of that. And then continuing to bolster and fortify the increased level of focus on training and development, specifically highlighted in the diversity and inclusion and equity around restorative practices, our hiring practices, shifting all of the training to include every child, every individual within our school system around this focus. And then clearly in the arena of equity around making certain that every child has a device, every child has equity and access to the connectivity and the internet by breaking that down with hotspots and the essentials needed there and building our partnerships in that one. So I can continue to go deeper and deeper, but we've set a platform to add to this each year as opposed to one major chunk this year, as I've done in previous budgets, continuing in a very staggered way to address these very important initiatives outlined in my strategic call to action with budgetary supports in there. That's where those efforts really get amplified, is through the budgetary support. Joan, that's just a few of them. I mean, I can go much deeper if you'd like.
That's excellent. Thank you.
This is Richard Clinch. I have one question, which is the enrollment figures for the next year's budget. Assume all the 1,600 give or take students that you said had left this year come back, correct?
That is correct. So I'm going to turn that over to the experts because I have a real strong understanding of that, but I don't want to make any mistakes regarding the particular calculations of how we calculated our FTEs, our full-time equivalents, meaning our full-time students, as a basis for the funding formula as that pertains to maintenance of effort, and then the focus on being held harmless at the state. And those 1,600 students continue to be illuminated in that process. And as what I'm looking at this is, hopefully this will be a temporary aberration of this dip of our, because we know where those students have gone. 1,600 break down to individuals who parents have decided to keep their children back out of kindergarten and not fully enroll them this year. We believe that will bounce back. A number of our families have decided to put their children in private in parochial schools. We hope that that will bounce back. And then a number of individuals who have done homeschooling, and we try to keep our focus on that. So I have to build a budget that is based on the fact of those young people returning and how we figure that in. I'm going to turn this to Mr. Siddiqui and Mr. Conforti, who have much more knowledge than I in that arena, if you would. Mr. Siddiqui.
Thank you, Dr. Martorano. Good morning, everybody. Jahantab Siddiqui, Chief Administrative Officer for the school system. As we looked at building the budget out, we looked at factors that may influence certain families coming back. We looked at the data for the grades, as Dr. Martorano mentioned, that had unenrolled from the school system. Typically, you'd see in our budgets a growth of about 800 to 1,000 new students each year. So our proposed budget for fiscal year 22 is only assuming a growth of 380 students. So while we do expect most of the students who unenrolled as a result of the pandemic do come back. We're not assuming that every single student would be back, but we've also tempered our growth expectations significantly. Again, if you look at the last several years of growth in the system, you'll see ranges from 800 to 1,000 students each year. And we've seen that. So our numbers are based on the information that we have available to us right now. It's the best science that our Office of School Planning was able to sort of develop. And I know they spoke in December and answered some questions related to that methodology. We will have official projections in February that the Office of School Planning will provide, and then certainly, we'll get additional information as we move through the budget process with the county. As the pandemic unfolds, as we get additional news about the vaccine, and we'll as the school system reopens. So we'll continue to adjust that and work with the county as we move forward. And just one of the things that we wanted to make sure that everybody understands is this is a very fluid situation. A lot can change between now and August. So we've got to be flexible and ready to be able to adapt to whatever those changes might be.
Absolutely.
So maybe a hand up on that topic, just to provide a little bit clarification for the committee. I think we know very well, just for the committee, the funding implications, formula-driven part, because the enrollment dropped this year, 2.8% drop, I think. What does do to the state aid formula-driven piece and to the county MOE calculation, and what is the governor's proposal, which is sort of different from that formula? Could you just clarify? Thank you.
An excellent point, Dr. Sun. Go ahead, Mr. Siddiqui.
Thank you, Dr. Sun, for that question. Yes, so as Dr. Martorano mentioned in the presentation, because of the enrollment decline and the sunsetting of the Curvin bridge funding that we received for the last 2 years, our system could lose up to $33.5 million in state and county funding due to that. 24.7 of that would be due to the enrollment decline. The funding formulas are based on the September 30th enrollment of the prior year. So our funding that we would receive through the maintenance of effort and through the state aid formulas for fiscal year 22 is based on the September 30th enrollment of the current school year. So there's always that lag. The governor's budget, which he announced last week, and we're still working through that budget. We're still meeting with MSDE and getting clarification and schedules on what that means. He does propose to hold school districts harmless for that loss of state aid, both related to enrollment as well as related to the Curvin grant sunsetting this year. There is also a provision in there that hinges the increase in funding that the governor has proposed on county governments increasing their allocation to their local school districts as well above fiscal year 21 levels. And that is that nod to help counties hold school districts harmless for their allocation, for their funding. We're still working through that. We got some clarifying information on that on Tuesday. We've got additional questions on what that really means, how much that might mean. So we'll be working with Dr. Sun and her team over the next few weeks to understand the implications and certainly see what the General Assembly will do during session beyond what the governor may have proposed and how that might impact us.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee?
Holly?
Barbara?
Barbara.
Okay, go ahead.
Have you developed specific strategies to outreach to those families to woo them back?
That is an excellent question. We are in the process of doing that, and all of my comments that I have made over the last several days as we have gone through a very intense process with the Board of Education in work sessions to adopt the reopening plan for March 1. My comments throughout that have been focused on definitely reaching out to those families to give them the assurance that we are moving back to normalized education as we come out of this pandemic. And it is my hope to do that by the fall. I mean, we want to get, that's our target to shoot for. That is my goal to shoot for and have the community embrace that. We also know through the breaking down of each one of our school system into the 70 school communities that my PPWs, my pupil personnel workers, our counselors, our administrators, they know who these families are. They have tried to maintain communication with them to keep them informed, and that will be a part of our process of reopening to identify those individuals personally and reaching out to them. I also need the community support in that to carry that same message out. So if you know of individuals in that arena, connect them back to the schools, because parents are making decisions right now, not only for this moment, but for the summer already, as well as for the fall. It is my responsibility to give hope to the community that that's what we are targeting for, keeping community informed, and hope and with our communications that individuals will come back as we also experience enrollment growth. So the simple answer is yes.
Could I ask, do we know whether there may be a weighting towards special needs children, or do we understand really the population that left and why?
Well, and it's not a real simple answer. I can give you general categories, but I will tell you that there are some students that I worry about. What keeps me up late at night are the troubles of my students who are most vulnerable in the homeless category. You know, and when I talk about our very affluent county, I have to always amplify the challenges within our community. And we have about 600 homeless students. Initially during the pandemic, it was reported that my homeless student number was way down. Well, that's not good news. We just don't know where they went. And trying to track those students from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, they're somewhere, but we don't know where they are. And that causes me great challenges. But for the most part, throughout the entire pandemic, the word engagement has been critical in reporting. So enrollment every day for online learning and engagement in the learning activities are two critical pieces that we have been following. And I'm very proud about the numbers that are very good for Howard County in the virtual arena. But still, our outreach to students who are in our most vulnerable categories of poverty, our homelessness, are the ones who are struggling the most. Case in point, I said, we've distributed 3.5 million meals during the pandemic, and we continue to sustain that. So it only makes sense that the students who are most vulnerable are most at risk leaving the school system, and we have a social and moral responsibility to find out where they are and support them.
Dr. Martirano, this is Joan Dreesen again.
Yes.
Should I assume that you are already connecting with some of the nonprofit organizations that work with these families to try to communicate, to get the messaging through to them?
Well, and again, because we're in this virtual environment, everybody doesn't always see what we're doing. We're constantly online. I never leave this office. I just change my tie. Constantly and interject a little humor here this morning. But yes, I am so proud to be a part of this community, and I've reached out to our nonprofits, constant ongoing collaboration with our groups. We have staff members responsible for that. And everybody is in a very symbiotic mode that we're all in this together. We all have to identify and pool our resources and focus on what matters, our most vulnerable individuals who are really struggling. And you can make that assumption, but let's not make that assumption too great, because we have to keep the intensity on that as we come out of this pandemic, as we continue to think about equity around vaccines, all areas. So the answer is yes, but I really wanted to bolster that up with actual words. The work of the school system continues in earnest. Although you may not see movement of people in the community, it's happening. And I'm very proud of that, but we can always do more.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martirano and your team, for coming and speak to the committee. We really appreciate Thank you.
Dr. Sun, if I may, I understand, and I can't see everybody because your little squares are about a ½ inch big on my screen. And I understand that Dr. Wu, my chairman of the board, is on here. So Dr. Wu, good morning to you. You have the fortunate pleasure of spending the rest of the day with me. So thank you very much. To members of the committee, thank you for your support. Dr. Sun, thank you for your leadership. I'm going to dip off now. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Our next speaker is Angela Braid from our school system. So the IT host, could you make her the speaker so she can try to share files from her screen?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Angela.
Just 1 second. I'm getting it up. I don't know if everyone can see
I
it.
think it's working. Yeah, it is.
Okay. Fantastic. Good morning. My name is Angela Braid. I am from Howard County Library System, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Support Systems. On behalf of our President and CEO, Tonya Akins, thank you for this opportunity to present to you today. Our mission is to deliver high-quality public education for all. We do this with intentional focus on equity and access. A vital component of Howard County System's renowned education system, we deliver excellence in education for everyone, advancing the economy and the quality of life. Our strategic priorities include ensuring educational opportunities are innovative, accessible, and convenient for every person in our community. And we do this by piloting innovative collections that meet our community's needs and exceeds their expectations, increases access and prevalence of self-directed and collaborative learning experiences for all, and creating spaces specifically designed to enhance self-directed education learning for children from birth to 5 years old and their caregivers, partnering with community organizations to address their library-based operational requirements and supporting their work to enrich learning and productivity in our community, and by leading strategic community engagement opportunities that enable us to reach new and underserved members of the community who may experience barriers to access. HCLS has been designated a 2020 5-star library by Library Journal for delivering excellence in public education for all ages. This 5-star ranking is attained by fewer than 1% of public libraries across the country. So to put it into perspective, there are more public libraries in the United States than there are McDonald's locations. And HCLS is the only library system in Maryland to earn this honor. Library Journal Index rates U.S. libraries based on per capita outcome measures, specifically overall borrowing of electronic materials, e-content, library visits, classes and events attendance, public use, Wi-Fi sessions, and use of online content such as online research tools, the databases. This prestigious ranking is particularly pertinent to this discussion this morning because it speaks to the level of service the library provides to the community with the funding received, the community utilization of those services as well. So really, it's a return on the investment measure. Our talented and innovative team of educators is the primary thing that sets us apart. The state of Maryland requires our instructors and those holding a master's degree in library science to earn 90 CEUs every 5 years. We raise that bar and require this of everyone on our team, including myself. So we're not only lifelong learning opportunities for the community, we ourselves are lifelong learners as well. This is so essential in Howard County, where over 90% of the residents have their library cards. Even during the pandemic, they're using them. At the end of June, we began offering contactless pickup of materials, and it was an instant hit. Customers can receive online or call any of our 6 branches for assistance. Demand is so high that we had to bring in additional shelving to facilitate all the materials that were reserved. The photos show the portion of the additional shelving range at Miller that was brought in for all the demand. Customers have more than 1,700 requests every day for books, music, and movies. And they send positive comments back to us, such as the one from this homeschool parent who wrote, "We are so grateful to HCLS staff for helping us and our homeschool be successful. We cannot imagine not having books we need to support our children's learning." Our team will even browse for you. Our new bundle bag service allows customers to choose from nearly 30 themes, from picture books to preschools to graphic novels and mystery books for adults. Customers place nearly 100 requests each day for these bundle bags. While our doors are closed, we continue to set the pace for the rest of Maryland. We have the highest per capita borrowing in the state, and we are open for contactless pickup, on average of 16 and a half more hours than other public libraries in Maryland. In addition, our research assistance has increased by 17% over the last year. We are consistently preparing for the next best thing, one of which is the ability to check out your items from your cell phone. This service will be available when it is safe for customers to come back into our branches. Now, during the pandemic, we've strategically engaged customers on social media. The numbers shown here tell the story of our customers' engagement online from the closure of our branches on March 16th to the end of November. Percentage increases are compared to 2019 data. And as you can see, they're whopping increases. So shown is the 119% increase of online accounts and the 71% increase of ebook usage alone. The photo on the right captures County Executive Ball and CEO President Tonya Akins reading The Raven, for our Ravens, of course, and also in honor of Poe's birthday. That video was viewed over 1,800 times in a matter of days on our page, with an equivalent number on the county executive's page. These high numbers are typical, and we are honored to have such a great community response. Shown here are quick stats for the online classes between November and mid-January. Our creative team does their classes from homes, our master gardener shares gardening tips from her garden, and they even get their pets in on the fun. Early childhood education instructor Megan Whitfield has taught language and writing at elementary, high school, and university levels nationally and internationally. She and her dog Fitz are among our instructors who've amassed a strong following. Fitz has become so popular, he now has his own Facebook page. And our art and education instructor, Jeremy Scott, an Oakland Mills High School graduate, holds a master's in fine arts and provides art tutorials on topics such as water-based coloring, pen and ink shadowing, how to stretch a canvas, and more. Our instructor, Eric Luan, could give the Property Brothers a run for their money with his backyard tutorials using tools that are available for checkout at our Elkridge branch DIY center. These folks are just a few of what sets Howard County Library System apart from other public libraries. It always comes back to our highly talented team, the diverse skill set they bring to the work, and of course, our customers. Their classes and many more from our team are available on YouTube for on-demand viewing and learning. We continue to receive requests from our customers to maintain all virtual services along with in-person services once the library fully reopens. We are planning to meet this demand with a hybrid business model post-pandemic. Each spring, the library partners with the school system at our A+ events, including the Spelling Bee and the Battle of the Books. Both events this year will be virtual. Battle of the Books, which typically fills 6 high school gyms full of excited students and their families, has really become a rite of passage for our 5th graders in Howard County. We are so happy this year to be able to offer this event. Pre-pandemic, we averaged about 300 teams per year. So we're right in there this year with 273 teams participating. And the event will be on April 16th. The use of e-resources, e-books, e-audio, databases, digital magazines, newspapers, e-learning tools for students, and the like has increased a whopping 167%. Many customers are new to these services and have shared their interest in maintaining the use of both e and print materials post-pandemic. And we know that will happen because our customers have full access to all formats now, and we're seeing a high usage across all formats. So this jump isn't solely about having full access to our physical spaces. It also is the story of discovery. When more people find out about these resources, more people will indeed use them. A to Z Resources is shown in blue at almost 43% total usage. This database targets businesses, research community, scholarly journals, reports, and provides access to mailing lists and more. Our time today doesn't allow me to go into a comprehensive presentation of the services provided by the library, but I've tried to include these to really emphasize the fact that the library is in use across all ages, all interests, occupations, and throughout the county. The library is a state agency receiving the bulk of its funding from the county, a small per capita allocation from the state, and a small portion from grants. Our board has approved the request, and it is for $26,746,422, with about $23.4 million in county funding. The state funding is based on a formula that accounts for all counties in the state, but also accounts for the financial snapshot of those counties. It looks at total wealth of the county and population. And we are one of the wealthier counties, so our portion is impacted by that. This year, the total proposed increase is $1,933,643. Of note, in response to our FY21 county-approved budget, which provided a 2% increase, the board had approved the budget reductions in Object 1 and 3 in the form of a 1-week furlough for all staff in the current fiscal year, as well as cuts to materials in order to make the budget work. Our FY22 proposed operating budget includes a reinstatement of funds removed for the furlough in the amount of $253,990. It includes a 2% COLA at $329,049. It includes a 3% employee merit of $503,445. We've also accounted for FICA and medical plan expenses in the amount of $138,014. This may look like a significant jump on the surface, but it's composed of basic costs. We understand and consider the county's fiscal position and have included no request for additional positions, although we truly need them to better meet our customer demands. In Object 2, we're requesting a modest increase of $145,000, primarily to fund the redesign of our website for reconstruction and search optimization for our many services and materials to help customers find them. This is a critical ask. Our website has really become even more of a virtual branch and a community engagement tool during the pandemic, and we know there's no turning back. We will continue to have a need to make additional content and resources available on this site. Object 3 is our proposed response to the increase in demand for all of our library collections formats, as you've seen on the prior screen, as well as the intended continued increases in e-content usage accelerated by the pandemic. HCLS boasts of the highest per capita borrowing in the state, and we are still not fully meeting all of our customers' demands. Our team does a great job curating our collection, but if we had more, our customers would borrow more. Our goal is to maintain the caliber of our collection, better meet our customer demands for e-content and other new content formats, lessen the wait times for materials, and especially time-bound requests related to student learning and school assignments. Our proposal prioritizes our talented team and our direct service to the community. In recognition of the fiscal climate, we have not proposed any increases in Object 4 or Object 5. I share with Tonya Akins the pride, and we are so truly proud of the library system team who continue to step up and provide extraordinary service to our community, even while being faced with a furlough during the pandemic. We took one for the team this year, and we really hope we will not be faced to meet the need, with that need again, to the furlough staff again, or cut resources or services to our customers in fiscal year 22. Lastly, we invite you to HCLS's signature event, Evening in the Stacks, one of Howard County's most anticipated funding events. Considered by many to be the county's premier event, is going virtual in its 24th year. This is not a typical virtual event. Our team has crafted a unique, one-of-a-kind experience that you don't want to miss. On February 27th, which is a Saturday, again, February 27th, Saturday from 7 to 9, Serata Virtual, Evening in the Stacks will transport guests to Italy. While they will stay safe at their home, festivities include Italian food, wine, author presentations, chef demonstrations, a silent auction, Italian tours, dancing on the piazza, and more. We're even going to take you truffle hunting. With that said, I would like to thank everyone for their time. One last piece, I'm sorry, is that the tickets to the Evening in the Stacks are $55 or $175 per person. It's based on the experience level, or $275 per couple. The event helps fund 2 critical programs to meet this year, and one of them is the hands-on STEM art and literacy learning activity kits, which will go to students K through 12, and also the access to Chromebooks and hotspots for our neighbors without internet access, so they can create resumes, search and apply for jobs, and take online classes to build their skills. Thank you so very much for everyone for your time and for your interest, and I look forward to any questions or inquiries.
Thank you very much, Angela. It's very informative. Any questions from the committee? I think you did a terrific job also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the next 2 speakers are our fellow committee members, and which are 2 economists that's going to give us a briefing about economic outlook. Start with Dr. Irani. Can the team please make Dr. Irani the presenter so he can share from his screen? Thanks again, Angela.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. There we go.
Cool, thank you.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. These are rather tumultuous times. I've done presentations since probably, if I look back at March, I've probably done 4 revisions to our economic forecast because of the changing nature of the pandemic and how it's impacted the economy. So as many people have indicated in their budgetary analysis, the situation is very fluid. And the data is changing, day to day, week to week, month to month. So that's maybe a shorthanded way of me saying, I'm not responsible for the forecast outcomes. There certainly could change. So, one of the big things that's really going to impact the forecast going forward is vaccinations and how quickly they are administered and accepted by the overall community. As well as and that drives in consumer confidence in terms of being able to sort of fully participate into the broader economy, which then sort of drives, travel, eating at restaurants, all the things that we've put on hold due to the public health crises. Once that begins to get back to normal, we'll begin to see recovery begin. When I initially began this forecast analysis back in March, we were predicting a V-shaped recovery, a rapid decrease in economic activity followed by a rapid increase in economic activity. But as time has evolved, we've switched over to the Nike swoosh recovery, which is a rapid decrease followed by a gradual increase in economic activity. So my presentation broke up into three broad areas: our national overview, a state overview, and then our forecast for the state of Maryland. So GDP, our broadest measure of economic activity for the nation. We did see that rather tumultuous dip in the second quarter of this year. Post March, we saw huge declines, but then we've seen it rapidly increase, recover. We're now at 33.4% annualized growth in GDP, which is tremendous. But again, we're still below where we were prior to the pandemic. So driving the GDP is our consumption. We are a nation of see it, want it, buy it. And obviously during the pandemic, we cut back our expenditures, primarily in dining out, travel, those sorts of things. And that did have the tremendous impact on the overall economy. But since we've recovered a little bit, we had about $12.9 trillion in economic activity, about 41% annualized growth. So we have recovered about 85% of our second quarter losses. Similarly, investment here refers to any purchases by firms for buildings, machinery, airplanes, transportation equipment, anything that's used to produce goods or provide services by businesses is considered to be investment. Also included that is housing. But generally, we did see a big jump in that again in the third quarter as basically the economy began to recover. One area that is a bit of a concern, we saw a government spending drop, and you would expect during a economic crisis or public health crisis, we'd expect that number to be actually much higher. But due to the stopping of the extended unemployment claims in July of this last year, as well as no stimulus package until recently. That has resulted in this decline in the expenditures. And again, this is one of those things where the role of the federal government in this case really needs to help bridge us from where we are now to our recovery. And this is something that we felt a little bit falling short for the federal government in this realm. Again, our exports have fallen and as well as imports, but again, we're still at a high deficit. So this is net exports. So this is our exports less imports, and so we import more, and therefore this is a negative number. So third quarter was about $1 trillion, probably one of the largest numbers we've seen in most recent history. And again, so we're we're still importing, but we're exporting less. So overall, the economy is sort of recovering. So the major indicators of of GDP, the major components of GDP, consumption, investment, government spending, and other things are sort of somewhat growing. Although consumption and investment are really the big drivers, we do expect government spending to perhaps tick up this coming year, given the fact that we have a new administration and a very aggressive fiscal stimulus package that would sort of help the economy sort of move from where we are now to recovery. Just looking at the job market here, so job openings are in the orange, and unemployed persons are in the blue, and you can sort of see that around 2018 those lines crossed, where we had more job openings than unemployed people. And then obviously in March of 2020, that number reversed. So basically we saw there were more unemployed individuals than there are job openings. So we still have a major gap in terms of the number of job openings versus the number of unemployed individuals. So again, there are fewer job openings and many people chasing those fewer job openings going forward. Again, many of those job losses or unemployed individuals were in industries such as restaurants, hotels, convention, travel, all those types of industries. National unemployment numbers, again, this is sort of the story we saw in April. The numbers rapidly rise up, and then they've sort of kind of tapered down a bit, about 6.7% December number of unemployment, and again, that's much lower than it was during April months. One thing that's not really shown on this graph is the labor force participation rate, which is the population of 16 and over who are working or actively looking for work versus the overall population of 16 and over. That number pre-pandemic was about 63.1%. Currently, it sits at 61.5%, so we've had a bit of a drop. It was at sort of one of its lowest points in April at about 60.2%. What we've seen is much of that drop in labor force participation rate was amongst females in the workforce. So we've seen a rapid sort of decline in female workforce participation rate due to the pandemic. Obviously driving some of that is we've had the closures of K-12 schools as well as childcare availability. So these are critical. So once again schools reopen, childcare becomes much more widely available. We expect sort of the economy to sort of begin to move along at a higher rate. Unemployment claims, we saw those initial numbers were rather shocking in March. 7 million people claiming weekly unemployment claims, just tremendous. We're still running around about a little less than a million claims per week. Initial claims per week, sort of it is kind of concerning. Continuous claims have sort of plateaued a little bit in terms of basically those individuals who are on unemployment, not those individuals who have filed for unemployment. The number is rather tremendous. Again, it's significantly higher, probably about 2/3 higher than it was pre-pandemic. So a significant portion of our population is unemployed. Consumer sentiment, a measure of how happy we are in the world, and again, it's fallen from its heights in pre-pandemic times. Again, most recent data from the University of Michigan indicates about 80.7. 100 is sort of the baseline measure, and you can sort of see, yes, even in the midst of a health crisis, we're still happier than we were in November of 2008, in the beginning of the financial crisis. So. There we are. So we'd rather be facing a health crisis than facing a financial crisis. Housing starts again, did fall during the Great Recession. We're slowly recovering, and then basically had a bit of a drop off. Again, some of that is driven by the fact that in some states, construction was not considered to be an essential activity, and so basically construction work halted. But since that has reopened, we've seen that number kind of rapidly kind of rise up. As I mentioned, we did see national retail sales saw their biggest drop ever in April. And again, driving that was some of the closures of many the stay-at-home orders, but that number has since increased. Interestingly, when we sort of look at that, how it impacts different states, so you can sort of see our different establishments. Food and drinking services are in the blue, grocery stores are in the orange. You can definitely see that basically our dining out activity decreased substantially when restaurants were closed, and even though takeout was available, it still was not able to make up the differences. And you can sort of see the orange line ramping up. Again, that was our run on toilet paper and hand sanitizer driving that number. But since then, that number sort of kind of plateaued a little bit. And you can sort of see that food establishments have sort of been increasing. There's been a dip. Again, part of this is policy prescription as states, as localities sort of limit dining activity to 50% capacity indoors or 25% capacity indoors or only outdoors. That has a impact on those types of establishments. And quite frankly, many restaurants make their higher profit margins tend to be on the in-store sales of drinks, cocktails, as well as even fountain drinks. So that is an ongoing challenge, and that will be a big question to address going forward, is how will those restaurants sort of survive. Looking at our manufacturing sector, again, pre-pandemic, it looked like it was heading into a bit of a recession. This is based on the Institution of Supply Management. And again, anything below a 50 is considered to be in recessionary territory. And you can sort of see that pre-pandemic, we were kind of sliding a little bit down towards that recessionary level. Obviously, during the recession, during the pandemic, we did have a bit of a dip down. But since then, it seems that we've somewhat recovered. We're heading up. Again, this could be due to increased manufacturing of PPEs, as well as ventilators, as well as all other activities. So this is, and again, also the realignment of some of the supply chains that had take place because of many of the off-site manufacturing sites were no longer available to many firms. As a result, again, this sort of helped perhaps boost domestic production. And again, we're in a very, very low interest rate environment. And as yesterday, Chairman Powell indicated that they would still continue to be aggressive in terms of supporting the economic recovery, which is good news. We're at historically low interest rates, and that will expect it to continue for the near future. There is no sort of threat of inflationary pressures going forward. It feels like what's sort of going on. So it seems like that there is I would say a kind of a tale of two economies here. We see individuals in the manufacturing sector continue to sort of see growth. Individuals in the services sector, especially those services that require human-to-human contact, have sort of suffered tremendously, as well as those business owners who own those businesses have also suffered tremendously. But individuals who are able in the professional scientific services have sort of been able to work uninterrupted through the course of this pandemic. Turning to Maryland, we're looking at Maryland's gross state product. It did have a tremendous drop in the second quarter for the pandemic reasons, and then we saw a annualized growth about 29.2% in the third quarter, which is good, strong growth. Again, still below where we were pre-pandemic, but the numbers are looking positive. Job recovery has been slow, and as you can sort of see, we had a major drop in the number of jobs. Those numbers have come up. Most recent data shows us about a plus 4,600 jobs being created in November at a 6.3% unemployment rate. And just like the national situation, in Maryland pre-pandemic, our labor force participation rate was 68.5%. It is now about 66%, most recent data. And then for even Howard County, at pre-pandemic was about 73.8% labor force participation rate, and then and then currently at about 69.6%. So we have all experienced sort of the labor force participation rate declining going forward. Unemployment claims again have been up and down. We've seen most recent data about 40,000, I believe, was the most recent data. So it is a rather large increase. And again, one of the biggest challenges of our unemployment systems, not only here in Maryland but across the nation, is they were never geared to accommodate this many people coming in at once requesting the claims. Moreover, many of them were geared towards denying first and then making the individual applicant sort of prove that they were eligible. We clearly saw that there were tremendous bottlenecks as well as delays in many individuals getting their unemployment insurance in a timely manner. So this is sort of a concern that perhaps we'll really begin to really rethink how our unemployment system works, not only here in Maryland, but nationwide. So this is an ongoing challenge, especially we need to support, many of these individuals who, no fault of their own, were thrown out of work due to a public health crisis. This is sort of initial claims, people applying, and then continuous claims you can sort of see again, well below, probably about 30,000, 35,000 pre-pandemic, and almost nearing about 100,000 post-pandemic. So a significant number of individuals are remaining out of work here in Maryland. So while those numbers are tremendous, some of the insulation that has occurred in Maryland because of our economy, and I've always said it's EDS, BEDS, MEDS, and FEDS. EDS being sort of our educational systems, MEDS being sort of our healthcare systems, FEDS obviously being our federal government approach, as well as our professional and scientific technical services, and then our BEDS are tourism. Government is a predominant source of employment here in Maryland. The federal government makes up about 5% direct employment here in the state, even much higher in Howard County. Again, followed by healthcare, hospital systems, professional, scientific, and technical services. Here, and this is for Maryland, a significant number of individuals are employed in those particular areas. This next slide kind of shows the data from February 2020 to November 2020, most recent data, and it kind of shows the idea that some sectors in our economy were more hit than others. So you can sort of see that even government did see a decline. We saw it especially in the educational systems. In-class aids were no longer available. Those types of things. Healthcare, we did see a drop, surprisingly. And again, many of that is private practices were closed due to COVID restrictions. But one of the areas that was hardest hit was accommodations and food services. These are hotels, restaurants, were really hit very hard. Also, administrative support and waste management and remediation. This is where our temp workers are in. And so those were also adversely impacted more so. Then in arts, entertainment, and recreation, so movie theaters, concert venues were also impacted. Generally speaking, all sectors did see some declines in their jobs, but those industries I mentioned were disproportionately hit harder. Healthcare is still a critical need, and you can sort of see looking at the Maryland Workforce Exchange. The predominant number of job openings are still in healthcare. And then followed by computing and mathematical operations. I mean, clearly working from home has put a real strain on our IT sector in terms of, ensuring that we're all safe. As sort of, was it Tuesday's Verizon outage, really sort of impacted how reliant we are on internet, especially internet at home. And as a result, that minor disruption really sort of caused some hiccups in many individuals' workday, given the fact that they were oftentimes, homeschooling their kids as well as trying to do their jobs. And without having internet, it proved to be very difficult for many individuals. But I would say one of the things that's changed a lot is that previous graph, sort of the absolute numbers. This has been the change, and one thing that's really kind of changed tremendously is sort of in the logistics areas, in transportation and material moving. Has sort of really kind of, increased the number of job openings almost by 83% here in Maryland. Production occupations, almost another 40. Healthcare practitioners, 23%. Life, physical, and social sciences, and building ground maintenances did increase slightly. But you can sort of see that, on the bottom side, the number of job openings that decreased in those areas were also significant as well. So, that being said, we're looking at the economy. We're looking at sort of the recovery. We're looking at the reopening gradually as sort of the households get vaccinated, and people feel more confident. as well as any proposed fiscal stimuluses coming into effect could have an impact on basically the duration and the severity of the recovery. And sort of this is what we predict. And this number is somewhat different than it was even 2 months ago. So the yellow line is our pre-COVID employment forecast, and it was somewhat flat for Maryland. And you can sort of see the red line is our COVID era employment forecast, and it does show probably about around 2024, we're back to where we were pre-COVID in terms of the economic recovery. So that's good news. I mean, in prior versions of this model, we had shown there was probably about a 200,000 employment gap well into the 2030s. So that number has sort of been changed dramatically going forward. So that's good. And then our gross state product, measure of economic activity, this does show still a gap, but it's not as wide as it once was. But generally speaking, it is expected to recover and grow sort of at a fairly solid rate going forward. And I believe that brings me to the end of my presentation. And thank you so much for staying awake.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rani. One quick question, I'll throw out one there. One comment also. I think your job discovery forecast takes about 2 to 3 years to recover. That's pretty much match what I learned from the state controller's office, their latest projection. Again, nobody has a crystal ball, but that's similar time frame they're looking at. Takes probably 2 to 3 years to fully recover on the jobs. And one question about what you're showing some of the transition of the new jobs, or that's more logistic and other part there. To what extent do you think these are like more permanent by nature, or some of them more temporary? Do you have some thought?
So it's going to be interesting as we kind of move forward, as we sort of get vaccinated. The more question is, will work from home continue at the pace it was? I mean, we've seen a tremendous increase, and some firms have indicated that they may actually make this more of a long-term solution, which minimizes their costs, which also means that many people will still continue to order goods and food from home as they have prior. So we expect that number to kind of maintain, maybe fall back a little bit. I think one of the things is we've gone from everyone sort of a vast majority of people not working from home to a large majority of people working from home. I suspect that we'll probably land somewhere in the middle, or more towards the less working from home number. So it won't be as few people working from home pre-pandemic, but it won't be as many people working from home during the pandemic, and that could have major significant impacts on even businesses that support business parks around those areas. So we think about the dry cleaners, we think about the many restaurants and delis around business parks that are basically there to support that daytime population. That daytime population may, in some part, shift out back to their suburbs.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Rani. It's very interesting about the layout of the big picture for the group. Our next speaker is Dr. Clinch. And are you ready to share from your screen?
I am.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. So can everybody see the presentation? Because I can't see the screen.
I cannot see it.
All right.
Is that because you have another screen? Sometimes that happens.
Where's the share?
It's in the bottom. Okay, you have it.
There we go. Sorry for the mistake from the beginning. All right, so today I'm going to talk about kind of the Tibet cleanup here, and take what Darius has kind of talked about from the national Maryland economy and try to translate it into what does that mean for the county's economy, and more importantly, kind of what does it mean for our job in terms of forecasting budget conditions. So I'm going to go real fast on this because Darius did a superb job of talking about the national and state economy. So I'll just kind of hit the high points here. But we've went from the longest recovery on history to the deepest decline in history. But we're getting back. So I'm not going to But when you look at the slide on the bottom right hand, or the chart on the bottom right hand side, you'll see that things went to the worst level of unemployment on really kind of in record. But still, right now, we're somewhere between the Great Recession and the 2001 recession nationally. So we're not out of the woods yet. Things are still pretty tough, but things are improving. So when you look at this, where we were last year at this time, kind of, it was probably the last kind of happy month we had was February, right? Because this was just starting. So when I presented this slide, the map on the right kind of shows what the national economy is. Red is recession, yellow is at risk, so it's kind of like the traffic lights. Blue is in recovery, and green is growth. Last year, the nation was all green, mostly. I think 40-something states were expanding. Right now, the whole state except Illinois, for some strange reason, are kind of classified as in recovery. So, going forward, as Darius said, nobody really can say what's going to happen because it depends on a variety of factors: the level of stimulus, the response to COVID, vaccinations. But generally speaking, there's a broad consensus, and the GDP figures come out today for the end of the year. That we're recovering, that there's a low risk of a double-dip recession, that we're in the kind of slow recovery that Darius talked about. Right now, there's a 24% risk of recession in Maryland. That's 27%. I'm not quite sure why we're worse than the nation when you think of our reliance on federal spending. The general Moody's projections are that the GDP is going to decline by about 3 to 4% in 2020, but start growth going out. But this is really based on two assumptions. One is that the vaccine rollout works and that fiscal stimulus passes. So this is kind of a summary of the national economy. But what's really important is to really think about this impact of state and local budgets. Now, the federal government can print money. The federal government can borrow money to cover operations, but state and local governments cannot do that to cover operations. And more importantly, as Holly has talked about in very many of our presentations, is that there's a lag. So when the economy is growing, it takes 2 or 3 years for that revenue to show up in county and state coffers. And when the economy is declining, luckily, things get, while we're recovering, the budget impacts of what we're talking about today will not snap back as fast as the economy itself. We're going to be feeling the fiscal effects and the income effects of this going forward. So Moody's is predicting that there's a national shortfall of over $200 billion at state level. When you factor in the local governments, it's over 300 million, and that without federal help, these shortfalls are going to really hamper the recovery nationally and also continue to stress people like us who have to figure out how to advise the county to best balance its revenues and expenses. The slide on the right is the back to normal index, which I thought was nice because as Darius talked about, we're about 80-something% back to normal, and we're not really expected to get back economically till the end of next year. But fiscally, as I said, these impacts are going to be with us for a while. So, translating that into Maryland, and I'm going to go really quick here, both the Board of Revenue Estimates and Moody's are both pretty optimistic about Maryland's recovery being, a good moderate recovery. Usually Moody's is a lot more positive on Maryland, where the Board of Revenue Estimates tend to be more negative. But when you look at the numbers, the Board of Revenue Estimates is predicting that we had a 6% drop in employment last year. Moody's is about 6%. In terms of employment growth, strangely, Maryland's Board of Revenue Estimates is more positive for this year than Moody's. But basically, whereas they're more negative on personal income growth. But the general consensus is that Maryland is going to recover. However, these assumptions, and as Darius talked about, really depend on a variety of things. what happens to COVID cases? Nationally, it declined substantially in the last week. If that keeps up, that's going to help us with reopening. The pace of vaccination, the fiscal stimulus, how much federal aid goes to the states, because as the state hurts, they spend and support counties less. So again, the issue here is while the economy is expected to recover, there are going to be both fiscal and economic hits. We haven't really talked about foreclosures at all. So people who've lost their jobs have not been paying on their mortgage, have not been paying rent. That has been protected. So what does that mean? Nobody's kind of talking about that. So as the GDP numbers come out, we're still heading for kind of a rocky road, statewide, nationally, and as I'm going to go into in Howard County. Holly, do you want me to ask questions now before I jump into the county budget, or should I just keep going? Oh, I'll keep going. When I look at the Howard County economy, and when I look at the issue of our charter to look at the state, the county's budget situation, we really have to talk about two revenue sources most importantly: property taxes and income taxes. So the chart on the left talks about property taxes and income taxes as a share of all fund and general fund revenues. So these two revenue sources account for 71% of all county funding and almost 90% of general fund revenues. So what drives these revenue sources? Population growth. So population growth drives our income tax and our property tax. The more people coming in, the higher the property values, the more property there is, the higher the taxes. The economic growth, as Larry talked about in last week's presentation, that expands our commercial base. So job growth brings in jobs, commercial tax base, but also supports residential growth. And those have all been remarkably positive in the county. And real estate, there's a lot of warning signs going forward in terms of both residential and non-residential retail activity, but real estate obviously drives property values, which drives property tax revenues. So let's go into each of these. Now, Howard County population growth has been very dynamic. We are outpacing the state and the regions to the north and south in terms of population growth, which that chart on the left shows, which is the county's growth normalized for 2000. So we're growing much more rapidly than the state, than Washington and the Baltimore area. And we are move this over. Let's see. The sixth largest county in terms of population. We're the fastest growing county, and we're the third fastest growing in terms of the numbers of people expanding, getting behind much larger counties like Montgomery County and Prince George's County. Now what's important here is what type of population growth we're having. So again, looking at this, and there's some good news and some bad news on this slide. Howard County is gaining population from all types of population growth. You can have natural growth, those are births over deaths. Then you have migration, which can be international and domestic. And Howard County is gaining population from all three because we're a very attractive place to live and work. So we're second overall in the state in terms of domestic migration. We're only one of 12 jurisdictions in Maryland that have positive domestic migrations. That's migration to and from other jurisdictions within the United States, and we're fourth in international migration. So we're attracting people. However, one of the things that's important to note in terms of the long-term fiscal health of the county is that the people moving into the county have lower incomes than the people moving out of the county. So the chart on the right-hand side are the IRS migration statistics, which look at the actual tax returns for people who are moving and staying put. And what you'll see here is that the people moving into the county have lower incomes than the people moving out of the county. Whereas, when you looked at these numbers, 10, 15 years ago, the people moving into the county had higher or very comparable income. So that has a real long-term impact on how we grow the county's economy and how we grow the county's fiscal base. Now, we're gaining from Maryland in migration. So a lot of the people moving into the county are moving into Howard County from neighboring jurisdictions. and we're losing in terms of population to other states. The moving to other states are predominantly, I think, retirees. We have a lot of Florida in the south there. Now we're gaining population from Montgomery and Prince George's and Baltimore City, Baltimore County, but we're losing residents to Carroll, Frederick, and Anne Arundel. I think one of the issues is housing costs getting so high in the county. So again, population is, generally speaking, population growth is a very strong positive for the county's economy and a strong positive for the tax-based growth. Now, when you look at population growth, it's also important to look at the types of population we have and that we're attracting. Now, the county has substantial workforce and demographic assets. We're a high-income county, so the people who live here have high incomes. The median household income in the county is $121,000. That's ninth highest in the nation. Now, we've gained from last year, but we're down. We used to be second in the nation in that in 2016. Now we have our population is employed. We have a 70% labor force participation rate using ACS data, which is higher than the state, slightly, but comparable, slightly below the metropolitan area. We have among the most educated workforces in the country, in the state, in the region. The 64% of the county's population, or employed population, has a bachelor's degree or above. They're well above, 50% above Maryland's rate of 41%, and higher than the DC metro rate of 51%. So the people who live here are high income, working, and educated. And where do they work? About 65% of them are employed in professional services occupations, and that has been good, which is why, as Darius talked about, it has mostly been industries like retail, restaurants that have been hard hit by COVID, whereas professional services has been less substantially impacted. So our county workforce has been less impacted than the state and other parts of the region. So because we have a high concentration of people in professional services and healthcare. Now, what's also important to note here is that Howard County is a growing employment center. 34% of our county residents work in county, 42% commute to the other Baltimore metropolitan area, and about 37% work in the DC suburbs. So what's really important to note here is, again, that the county is emerging as a much bigger employment center, as Larry talked about in last week's presentation. So the percentage of people living and working in the county grew by 20% since 2010, whereas the percentage of people with these long commutes into DC and Virginia has actually declined, the number and percentage. So one of the things is that population growth and employment growth have been integrally linked in the county, and that is a good sign. So that has, generally speaking, been the good news, that we are attracting more people into the county, that the people we're attracting are high-income, educated professional workers with who can pay a fair amount of taxes. However, there are some warning signs, kind of in terms of our personal income forecast that we're preparing. In the long-term labor force, this is the number of people living in Howard County and work anywhere. That we have been growing much more rapidly than the state as a whole, but our labor force fell by 3%. Again, as Darius talked about, I think a lot of this has been female labor force participation, adjusting to the impacts of COVID family requirements, not necessarily leaving the workforce for the long term. This was higher than the state's decline. And in terms of employed residents, again, we're generally stronger in the long term, but the percentage of people with jobs fell in Howard County as much as it did statewide. So those are kind of the worrying signs kind of going forward in terms of population growth. So again, population, overwhelmingly positive factor here. When Larry talked last week about economic growth, that again has been substantially strong for the county. When you look at the chart on the left-hand side, that shows normalized for the year 2001, the Howard County versus the state, both regions to the north, how we've grown. And you see the Howard County economy, which is the light blue line, has expanded, by 30% since 2001, far out in terms of the jobs in the county. So, employment growth has really been a substantially positive thing driving county fiscal and economic conditions. In 2019, the most recent full year's data that's available, we tracked the US in terms of we had 1.4% population growth in 2019, whereas, both Maryland, the metro area, and the DC area all lagged the nation in terms of employment growth. And again, on the right-hand side, this is really kind of just looking at the post-recession recovery. So this is from the trough of the 2009 recession to the peak right before the COVID recession. Howard County is the fastest growing county. It was the fastest growing county in Maryland and added the second most jobs, again, despite the fact that we're about sixth in terms of total employment. So economic growth has been substantially positive in the county and really contributed to an improvement in financial and fiscal conditions in the county. What we're looking at here is the composition of the county's economy, which is, again, important to kind of figure out in terms of both COVID recovery and long-term economic growth. What is the composition and performance of the county's economy? So on the right-hand side is the kind of chart summarizing this. We have the county's employment, which is the 2001, 2009, 2019, so long-term. We have what's called a location quotient, which measures the concentration of employment in that industry, with 1 being the national average. So if you have the national average concentration of employment in that industry, your location quotient is 1. If you have a location quotient above 1, that means you have a higher concentration of employment in that industry. And that may mean that the county's economy is specialized in that activity. And then the right-hand side is the growth. So what I've really highlighted is in the bolded is the sectors in which the county is specialized. So we're specialized in construction, wholesale trade, Jessup, professional services, which is really the stuff that Larry talked about in terms of lots of government contracting, cyber, those types of things, and then arts, entertainment, things that serve our county's population base. So, this is, a very strong economy. We have a diverse economy, which is, again, good. So we're creating jobs across skill spectrum. So we are creating middle skilled jobs in terms of construction and wholesale. We have high skilled jobs in terms of professional services and those types of things. We're an emerging corporate headquarters location. Management of companies, which is back office and headquarters operations, has grown tremendously in the county as we've attracted more commercial and office space. And when you look at these location quotients, we're below the national average in terms of healthcare and hospitality sectors. So there's some opportunities for employment growth there, kind of pre-COVID. So again, economic growth, we have a diversified and very strong employment base, and that has been and can be very supportive for the county's fiscal conditions. Switching over to the last area that kind of drives our personal income growth projections is real estate conditions. Now, the real estate market, as we've all read in the paper, is really hot right now. The median sales price in Howard County is now $410,000 to $475,000 in the last year. This is the highest in Maryland. So this chart on the right-hand side has a couple things. As you can see, I kind of like complex charts. We have the median price, which is the green, which goes on the right, and then we have units, which is units sold in the blue in the active inventory here. So what you can see here is that, this goes back to 2004. That we have had tremendous growth in terms of the price of housing. We have a full recovery in terms of units sold in the county, but we're having an emerging inventory problem, as we've talked about, especially with AFFO and those types of things last year. We're not generating the new inventory that we need to support continued population growth. So right now, inventory matches the units sold. We have less than 1 month of inventory active in the market. So that's a strong warning sign, because as we've talked about in the past, the county's fiscal base is based on the composition or the combination of expanding population as well as income growth among the resident population. So looking forward, this is the permitting activity. So what you can see here is the number of units authorized for construction in the county over the last, let's see, since 2000. And we're down to the lowest levels we've kind of ever seen in the county in the last 10 to 20 years, with only 800 units authorized for construction rounding up in 2019, and with year-to-date less than 700 in 2020. So in terms of continued population growth, that's a significant issue going forward, is that we can expect, with lower numbers of units being built, lower levels of population growth and lower levels of personal income growth, and resulting in lower levels of income and property tax revenues in the county. And so what's going on here? I think it's AFFO, the potential increase in impact fees, and as we talked about in last week's presentations, the county is running out of land for both commercial and residential development. And this is all happening, again, in this county, despite a hot national, state, regional, and local housing market. It's also happening in terms of the inventory declines in other Maryland counties as well. Many of them are running out of land or facing many of the same problems that Howard County is facing. Now, when you're looking at non-residential development activity, there's numerous headwinds here. So on the right-hand side is the value of commercial real estate put in place, or permitting to be put in place going forward. And as you can see, it was growing substantially pre-COVID, as Larry talked about, in terms of the growth of Maple Lawn, downtown Columbia, as the commercial base was expanding. It has since dropped to $45 million in new permitting activities, which is a precipitous decline. And again, there's a number of things going on here. The county is running out of commercial land, as we talked about last time. There's a mismatch between the long-term demand for employment space in the county and the inventory of space to house that land. Now, there's an impact on COVID-19 here. And these impacts, if anybody really knows the answer of what's going to happen, I'd love to hear it. I've been talking to a lot of developers around the state, and I've heard, very smart, very rich developers say one thing and another one say that he's wrong or she's wrong, and there's others. But I think there's going to be a couple impacts overall. One, there's going to be less demand for office space per worker. As Darius talked about, people are making changes in terms of where they work at home, those types of things. So with work at home is going to be with us at least in the near term, which is negative, means there's going to be less demand for commercial space. There's also going to be changes in retail demand. We're all getting used to buying our stuff online. I've set foot in the mall once in the last 9 months. So we're getting our stuff online, which again is negative in terms of commercial space development. And again, commercial is the best type of thing to have from a property tax perspective. It generates revenue and demands relatively limited services. However, that's not necessarily all bad in terms of COVID on the impacts in the counties. There's a huge difference in terms of the lease rates between DC, downtown DC especially, and Howard County, and downtown Baltimore and Howard County. And as a result, one of the things that many real estate analysts think we're going to see is more demand for suburban office space. If people are going to be working from home, why do you want to pay 2 to 3 times more to have your office downtown if people are not getting the benefit of meeting with clients, meeting with each other? So that might mitigate somewhat the impacts on places like Howard County in terms of because of the real estate being relatively cheaper here than commercial downtown. So there's substantial headwinds here. And one of the other things that Larry did not talk about in his presentation last week was the impact of AFFO. One of the things we talked about last year in terms of the AFFO impacts is live where you work is a key marketing strength. One of the key assets of Howard County is that you can get office space and your workers will want to live in Howard County. As we curtail the level of residential space being developed in the county, that will have an unintended consequence potentially in terms of reducing demand for commercial space, as well as the county becomes less attractive for employers whose workers cannot find housing here in the county. So, as Darius talked about, the economic outlook is generally speaking positive. However, it's hard to make predictions here. Why is that? COVID, new variants, we have the Brazilian variant, the English variant. that are supposed to be worse and are going to kill us all. We have the vaccines. We ordered 50% more vaccines, which is going to save us all. We have additional fiscal stimulus, which will hopefully be coming down the pipeline and will help us. One of the things that we didn't talk about is the new administration. The outgoing or the past administration was hostile towards federal employment, hostile towards federal spending. Maryland is the second, third, fourth most dependent state on federal employment and federal spending. So, the reversal of that trend towards moving federal employment out of the region, declining federal spending or emphasis on federal spending in contract and research, which Maryland does a lot of federal research, should be positive on the state and the county economy. And again, fiscal here, the issue is that the state fiscal conditions are not as bad as they could have been, but the effects of, as I've talked about, the effects of this downturn will last long into the future. And the Kerwin Commission, in terms of wanting to fund more state funding for education, means that the state, already dwindling state aid for counties outside of education, can be expected to be negatively impacted. So I prepared, at Holly's request, 2 personal income forecasts here. One is based on my historical model, which is really kind of a share model, looking at conditions in the county as they relate to growth in the state's personal income. And based on that, the general consensus is that personal incomes will grow in 2020 despite COVID, and that is because of the massive influx of federal spending, the COVID checks, the unemployment insurance additions, those types of things. But personal income growth can be expected to slow relatively quickly into the next year. So, I predicted about 1.2% in the county, then return back to normal in 2022. So what's important to note here is that the county is facing significant fiscal constraints in the next 2 fiscal years. So the next model really kind of tries to build in this impact. As you saw, we have less commercial space being developed, less residential space being developed. As a result, the population growth part of our personal income growth can be expected to fall. And I'm using the lower predictions for state growth. And again, that lowers those numbers substantially, for about half for fiscal 2021 in terms of personal income growth. So that's a really quick presentation that used up, I think, a lot of my time. I will take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clint. Again, very informative and very great analysis there. So I want to ask our committee members, anybody have questions? Please make sure you unmute yourself.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's for Dr. Clench or Dr. Arani. I guess, the Fed's going to keep rates essentially at 0. This could be 12, 13 years that we have rates at 0. What effect is that going to have, this persistent, incredibly low interest rate environment? What does that effect does that have on our pension obligations? We're just not going to get the return now that it's like a permanent low interest rate scenario. We're never going to get the fixed income interest rate return for our retirees, just as we're going to have more pension obligations hit this decade.
That's a hard question, and I doubt anybody can really answer because we don't know. So I think in the near term, interest rates are going to have to stay low for the fiscal to address the fiscal conditions. In the long run, it really depends on what happens macroeconomically, money supply, those types, and inflation wise. So clearly, in the near term, in my opinion, and I think one of the things is you could probably never get 2 economists to agree. Is that it's here to stay in the long run, in the short run, but in the long run, nobody knows. But you're right. If we have a Japanese level low interest rates, low inflation for decades, what that means for pension obligations and savings is hugely negative. Darius, what's your thought?
I have the same opinion. Interest rates have been low. I mean, almost I mean, it is now the long run in terms of interest rates being a low environment, 13 years plus. And that's driven a lot of the money into the equity market. So we've seen a lot, we've seen the Dow Jones and other indices just rise tremendously over these last few years in spite of economic conditions. But yeah, it has really wreaked havoc on those individuals who are relying on interest-backed assets to sort of, fund their retirement, as well as sort of any conservative approaches and pension fund obligations. So yeah, it is going to be a challenge, especially when those pension fund obligations come due and need to pay out. We saw some of that example happen in the Great Recession, as many localities and states struggled to meet their pension obligations, and resulting in that basically some of the budgets were almost more than half driven towards paying those pension obligations versus sort of operating costs. So it is something to consider. It is going to be an ongoing challenge. And to Richard's point, yeah, we're probably going to expect to see low interest rate environments for the next couple of years. Beyond that, my crystal ball is cracked and doesn't quite know where to go.
I have a question about Kerwin. If we look at just money in versus money out of Howard County as a result of Kerwin, what's the net cost to the county?
Current funding is independent of the expenditure side. So that was the state revenue based on the current committee's recommendation above the original formula-driven part of the state aid. Having said that, some of the carbon funding has condition attached to that. So it's not necessarily all support existing programs. Sometimes they ask for additional program or new focus program, and not always be able to, I guess the funding may or may not be able to fully support what was the indicated part, and sometimes would ask for additional money from the local. It's not explicit matching, but like there's some additional needs on that. So it's in that way. Is that the type of question, like Todd?
Yeah, I'm obviously the cost of Kerwin statewide is extremely high. And
oh, you're talking about who's funding?
Yeah, who's funding it, and Howard County will be a lesser beneficiary than other counties, which would suggest that Howard County taxpayers will be paying more than they're receiving back. I just didn't know if that had been quantified in any way.
I haven't seen it. Kerwin's going to crowd out all other federal or all other state funding, as education's already doing in other jurisdictions. So we've seen huge declines in state support for things like roads, which we've seen these presentations over the last couple of years. But correct, one of the goals of Kerwin is to equalize spending. Howard County is the most affluent jurisdiction in Maryland. We will probably not see dollar for dollar benefits from any state tax increases to fund Kerwin. It's probably meant to be a net negative.
Yeah, well, it almost has to be by definition, right?
Jahan Siddiqui with the school system. There are mandates within the Kerwin legislation for certain new programs, but as some of you mentioned, Howard County doesn't necessarily see the same proportional increase in state aid that some other districts might see. So the challenge for us is going to be how we fund those mandates when they are put in place.
Yes.
But we're also sort of waiting at this point to see what happens with the legislation. Override is expected, but we've also heard that there may be a second piece of legislation that will likely address some technical issues and some funding issues. So we'll sort of continue monitoring that. The mandates aren't likely to impact us until the next fiscal year. So the original legislation, which was approved last year, essentially those mandates from it would have kicked in fiscal year 22. Now it's not being overridden until this year. See that most of those mandates will not kick in for another year or 2 years, and that's because the funding doesn't come in until the following fiscal year.
Yes, and thank you for clarification. I think now I believe it is likely to fiscal 23 is official, like a kicking of Kerwin, but it's never been. I guess the current committee mostly recommended the spending level and how to spend, not the funding source and how to fund it. There are a piece was identified, but a large portion of the funding source have not been identified. So it could be the state seeking for new sources, meaning raise taxes or other things there, or could be shifting of state sources from other things. Could be those spending on state agency or the ones that county different service receive. So that's all unknown at this point, but that's a really good question from Todd. We only have 5 minutes, so I want to, anybody else have question, please take the opportunity. Okay, I have one quick question, I guess, or like for both of you. I think both of you kind of mentioned that the economic recovery probably largely a swash shape, meaning it take at least a couple years, at least for job market to recover. And also historically, when I look at the county's historical recession experience, when it transfer the county's revenue impact, it takes also there's a lagging because reconciliation, tax filing, and assessment takes a while to get reflected on that. So do you guys want to talk a little bit more on that, the lagging impact, just kind of because we try to understand the impact on the county's revenue picture?
Yeah, I guess the issue is it will take into 2022 for employment to get back at the state level to where we are. And as you said, that there's about a 6 month lag or 6 to 9 month lag between the collection and the earning and disbursement of that money to the county. So as I said in my presentation, we can expect this to be with us for the next 2 years in terms of slower revenue growth, despite better earnings and employment outlook.
Yeah, I agree with Richard. I mean, obviously, the biggest challenge we face is the budget holes that many of the states and localities generated during the pandemic, and whether or not fiscal stimulus will be there to kind of patch those dollars up. That's going to be critical because obviously every state and locality has to have a balanced budget, and not having a balanced budget means that basically some hard decisions need to take place. So that's critical. I think having the federal stimulus targeted, as Richard mentioned, if that sort of does come to fruition, that really does help our revenues long term, because basically it avoids that sort of that significant dip or decisions about cutting back services for many of our constituents.
And I think the other issue is, as it talked about in the Board of Revenue Estimates, is there will be positive news probably in the form of capital gains income in this fiscal year, being because what you're earning last year and this year is again lagged by another 12 months. But there should be some offsetting positives from the stock market growth, unless we're in a bubble. Which, if I knew that, I'd be shorting something. So.
Okay, thank you all very much. So we are about to adjourn. Just want to thank all the speakers and also our IT support for today's meeting. And next week, Thursday, same time, we will discuss another few important subjects there. Some are related to today's discussion. We will present preliminary revenue outlook as well as debt indicator projections. We will also invite our planning department back to talk about long-term demographic trends, development trend, and also they're considering also bring the consultant in to have a very brief share of the process and where they are and their approach in terms of updating of the general plan. So I think we will also have a lot of information to digest at our next meeting. Thanks everybody for participating, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.